Greetings, students, wherever you find yourself to be, and whatever time it is. I hope you're doing well, and let's get back to doing logic. Now, we've learned previously that an argument form is said to be valid if and only if it's impossible to have all true premises and a false conclusion. So a valid argument would be an argument that's an instance of a valid argument form. Also, if an argument is an instance of a valid argument form and it has all true premises, then it must have a true conclusion as well. Now, certain of these forms are so common and well known that any educated person should be able to recognize them. And it'll be worth our while also to practice recognizing these patterns of reasoning, because we want to become educated as well. So we could call these common or famous forms. Now, before we start, remember some of our essential terminology. We have what is called a conditional statement, such as, if you study hard, then you will pass, which has the form, if P, then Q, symbolized with our arrow. And there are two components, remember, of a conditional statement. There's the antecedent, which comes after the if, and there's the consequent, which is the component statement or proposition that comes after the then. The if and the then are not part of the propositions, right? This is the proposition and this is the proposition, and it's if antecedent, then consequent. Now, our forms are so famous or common that they've been given names, and here, mostly by medieval logicians. And this one was called modus ponendo ponens in Latin, the mode that affirms by affirming. But we just shorten it to modus ponens, or shorten it even more to MP. Consider this example. If I'm a hobbit, then I love second breakfast. I am a hobbit, therefore I love second breakfast. We make our little dictionary, and we symbolize it, if H, then L, L, therefore M, which gives it the form, if P, then Q, P, therefore Q. And since this is a valid argument form, any possible substitution instance of modus ponens is valid as well. Our second form that any educated human being should recognize is called modus tollendo tollens by the medievals, the mode or way that denies by denying, or simply MT. Consider our example. If Lady Galadriel takes the Ring of Power, then she will become a Dark Queen. It is not true that Lady Galadriel becomes a Dark Queen. Therefore, it is not true that Lady Galadriel takes the Ring of Power. Again, we make our dictionary and symbolize it. If R, then Q, not Q, therefore not R, which gives us the universal form or propositional form, if P, then Q, not Q, therefore not P. And since this is a valid argument form, any possible substitution instance of modus tollens is valid as well. Now, soon we'll learn how to prove that these forms are valid, but for right now, you'll just have to take my word and the word of all those medieval philosophers, too. Our third form has come to be known as hypothetical syllogism, abbreviated with the HS. It's called hypothetical because it involves conditions. Conditionals. Conditionals are also called hypotheticals, or if-then propositions, while syllogism comes from the Greek words meaning to reason together. Consider this argument instance. If Frodo goes to Mordor alone, then he will fail. If Frodo fails, then Middle-earth falls to Sauron. If Frodo goes to Mordor alone, then Middle-earth falls to Sauron. We create our dictionary, and we symbolize it. If A, then F, F, therefore M, therefore if A, then M. And that gives us the form, if P, then Q, Q, therefore R, therefore if P, then R. Now, since this is a valid argument form, any possible substitution instance of it is valid too. Now, another terminological reminder. Remember that a disjunction is any proposition which has the form P or Q, right? And we symbolize or by our V. And this is called the left disjunct, and this is called the right disjunct. And the thing as a whole is a disjunction of P and Q. So this is called a disjunctive syllogism, an act of reasoning that uses disjuncts, symbolized as DS, and it comes in two similar forms. Suppose I said in my first premise, either have bacon or sausage with my second breakfast. And in 2, I say I did not have bacon with my second breakfast, therefore I have sausage. We make our little dictionary. We symbolize it, B or S, not B, therefore S, which gives us the form P or Q, not P, therefore S. But suppose I have another hobbit, and I say either I have bacon or sausage with my second breakfast. I did not have sausage with my second breakfast. I have bacon, because I'm a hobbit who prefers bacon. We symbolize it, either B or S, not S, therefore B. Okay? And that gives us either P or Q, not Q, therefore P. So these two together are called the forms of disjunctive syllogism. And since this is a valid argument form, any possible substitution instance of it is valid as well. And again, in a few weeks, you'll be able to prove that it's a valid argument form and won't have to take my word for it. Our next common form is called constructive dilemma, and we abbreviate it as CD. And it combines both conditional and disjunctive propositions. Now, a dilemma is a choice between two options presented as alternatives, and this one is called constructive because it offers a choice between two positively stated alternatives in the conclusion. And this is actually a famous argument form in the history of philosophy, giving rise to such ancient and famous dilemmas as the following. Premise 1. If something is good because God commands it, then what is evil to us can be good. 2. If God commands it because it is good, then the good is greater than God. 3. Either something is good because God commands it, or God commands it because it is good. Therefore, either what is evil to us can be good, or the good is greater than God. Right? So we take our propositions and we begin to symbolize them. We let B stand for good because God commands it. C, God commands it because it's good. E, for what is evil to us can be good. And G, the good is greater than God. And that gives us premise 1, if B then E. Premise 2, if C then G. Premise 3, B or C. Therefore, E or G, which gives us our form. If P then Q, if R then S, either P or R, therefore either Q or S. And since this is a valid argument form, any possible substitution instance of it is valid as well. Our next form is called destructive dilemma because it offers a choice between two negatively stated alternatives. Right? This is another famous one from the history of philosophy that maybe we'll talk more about later in the course when we learn how to prove it. If God is all-powerful, God is able to eliminate evil. If God is all good, God wants to eliminate evil. Either God is not able to eliminate evil, or God does not want to eliminate evil. Therefore, either God is not all-powerful, or God is not all good. Here we have our little dictionary. Right? P, God is all-powerful. A, God is able to eliminate evil. G, God is all good. W, God wants to eliminate evil. Premise 1 is if P then A. Premise 2, if G then W. Premise 3, either not A or not W. Conclusion, either P or not G. Which gives us if P then Q, if R then S, not Q or not S, not P or not R. And since this is a valid argument form, any possible substitution instance of it is valid as well. Now, in general, a fallacy is an error or mistake in reasoning, which could involve its content or its form. And a formal fallacy, as you might imagine, is a pattern or form of reasoning that is wrong due to a flaw in its logical structure which makes that form invalid. Remember that an invalid argument is one in which it's possible to have all true premises and a false conclusion. So an invalid argument is an instance of an invalid argument form. And all substitution instances of such a form are bad or invalid arguments. They're notorious. They're disgraceful. They're disreputable. they're nefarious, they're shameful, they're vile, they're ignominious, they're scandalous, they're detestable. We don't want to use these forms, and we want to detect them when the supervillains of logic try to use them against us. And some of these forms are so common that they've been given names so that you can watch out for them. And we might think of them as infamous forms. And there's really two of them, like two supervillains, a pair of supervillains that go around casting their dark powers on the minds of the unwary and fooling them all the time. We want to be able to recognize them on sight so we can take care of them with our logical powers. The first supervillain of logic is called the fallacy of affirming the consequent. Right? Remember, this is the antecedent and this is the consequent. Remember our terminology, right? So consider two arguments. Suppose I said, if it's raining, then the ground is wet. The ground is wet, therefore it's raining. Using our dictionary, if R, then W, W, therefore R, which gives us the form, if P, then Q, Q, therefore P. And I've affirmed here in the second premise that the consequent is true, right? And I've drawn a bad conclusion from that, an invalid conclusion. Consider another example. If he's a dog, then he's an animal. He is an animal. Therefore, he is a dog. If D, then A. If A, then D. Go up on the board there and straighten that out. Which gives us the form, if P, then Q. Q, therefore P. Now, these arguments are invalid and have the same invalid form. And again, in just a few weeks, you'll learn how to prove that it's invalid. But for right now, you just have to take my word for it. Though I think you could see how it's invalid, that any substitution instance of this form will always be invalid. Now, if an argument form is invalid, it is possible to have all true premises and a false conclusion. Then I can think of a case where the two premises are true and the conclusion is false. So consider. It is certainly true that if it is raining, the ground would be wet. But the ground could be wet from a broken water main, or from watering the grass, and so forth. There are many reasons the ground could be wet. But this argument that we're looking at wants to claim that if the ground is wet, then it's raining, which is clearly wrong. Similarly, while a dog is definitely an animal, there are many other animals besides dogs. So we can think of instances where all the premises are true and the conclusion is false. Now, one way to show that the form is incorrect, to sort of illustrate it clearly to yourself or to another person, is to give what is called a counterexample. A counterexample is an argument that has the same pattern or form as the one in question, but in which it would be plain to everyone that the premises are true and the conclusion is false. Consider this one. If I'm in St. Pete, then I'm in Florida. I am in Florida, therefore I am in St. Pete. If S, then F, F, therefore S, which gives us that form. If P, then Q, Q, therefore P. Now clearly, if I were standing in Miami, I could say I'm in Florida. If I'm standing in Miami, it would be true that if I'm in St. Pete, that I'm in Florida. And it would be true that I am in Florida, but it would be false that I'm in St. Pete because I'm in Miami. And this example clearly illustrates that all substitution instances of this argument form are invalid. Now, you don't want to confuse these two forms, and I'm putting this up in big blue and red letters because in every class I've taught for 28 years on the exam, students mix these up. But I have great hopes that this will be the year when no student mixes it up because I'm making videos that you can watch over and over again, so it'll sink clearly into your mind. Or just because I'm hopeful, right? But see, modus ponens. If P, then Q, P, therefore Q. If I'm human, then I'm a mammal. I'm a human, so I'm a mammal. That's valid. Consider this. If P, then Q, Q, therefore P. If I'm a human, then I'm a mammal. I'm a mammal, therefore I'm a human. Well, that's invalid. right? We can think of an instance where this has all true premises and a false conclusion. It's going to be true that if I'm a human, then I'm a mammal. But what if I'm a reptile, right? What if I'm an elephant? Or what if I'm some other kind of mammal, like a dolphin, right? Right? It wouldn't be true then that I'm a human, right? So we'd have all true premises and a false conclusion. Now, our other infamous form that we're considering here is called the fallacy of denying the antecedent, right? And again, here's our two pattern arguments that we'd be considering. If it's raining, then the ground is wet. And suppose we said it's not raining, therefore the ground is not wet, right? Which gives us our translation, if R then W, not R then not W, which is an instance of this form. P then Q, not P, therefore not Q. Clearly, it could be true that if it is raining, then the ground is wet. It could be true that it's not raining, but it could be false that it's not wet because the water main could have been broken. We could have went out with a hose and sprinkled it, and so on and so forth, right? Or this one. If he's a dog, then he's an animal. He is not a dog, therefore he's not an animal. I mean, that one sort of jumps out and beats you on the head and lets you know that it's a supervillain of logic, because that's clearly not true, right? If D, then A, not D, then not A, giving us if P, then Q, not P, then not Q, right? It could be true that if he's a dog, then he's an animal. It could be true that he's not a dog, right? But it could also be false that he's not an animal. He could be a squirrel if he's not a dog, and he'd still be an animal. These arguments are invalid and have the same invalid form. So any substitution instances of this form will always be invalid. And our geographical counterexample helps make this clear to us or to anyone we're talking to. If I'm in St. Pete, then I'm in Florida. I'm not in St. Pete, so I'm not in Florida. But I could be in Orlando, right? So anything of the form if P then Q, not P, therefore not Q, which is denying the antecedent, is an invalid form, and any instance of it is an invalid argument. See if you can recognize the problem here. I'll give you a minute to think about it. If the creature is able to perform puzzles underwater, then it is intelligent. It is false that the creature is able to perform puzzles underwater. Therefore, it is not intelligent. And here we see Professor Zapinski prove that the squid is more intelligent than the house cat when posed with puzzles under similar conditions, right? So it could be true that if the creature is able to perform puzzles underwater, then it's intelligent. But why is it false that the creature is able to perform puzzles underwater? Well, it can't breathe underwater, right? If it could breathe underwater, it could match the octopus, maybe, right? But that's not a reason to conclude, given the form, that it's not intelligent. This is a bad argument form. Now, nota bene, note well, you don't want to confuse these two either. Students are always confusing these, or people in general. Matter of fact, I think that's how these arguments fool people. They seem so much like this one that if you say them real fast, you can make people think you're saying that, right? When you're saying that, by the way, that's misspelled. Let me fix that. And that's probably how that happens, I think. Because it can seem so obvious, but when you're saying things aloud, it's not written down, or you're just reading very fast, you get them confused. In any case, here we have modus tollens. If P then Q, not Q, therefore not P, which is very different from if P then Q, not P, therefore not Q, right? It's the second premise where we have the big difference. If I'm human, then I'm a mammal. I'm not a mammal. I'm not a human. Valid. If I'm human, then I'm a mammal. I'm not a human. I'm not a mammal. Well, what if you were a whale or a dolphin or a puppy dog? So let's think about our four conditionals a bit, right? In modus ponens, we have if P then Q, P therefore Q, right? But in the fallacy of denying the antecedent, we have if P then Q, not P, therefore not Q, which is invalid. We have the valid form of modus tollens, if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P, but we have the invalid form, right, the fallacy of affirming the consequent, if P then Q, Q, therefore P. So why is it valid to affirm the antecedent, which is essentially what we do here in modus ponens, and it's valid to deny the consequent in modus tollens, but not to affirm the consequent or to deny the antecedent? Consider the following premise. If Joe is a father, then he is a male. And of course we mean a biological father here, right? If F, then M, which gives us if P, then Q. If Joe is a biological father, does it follow that he is a male? Yes, right? And this is modus ponens. If F, then M, if P, then Q, P, therefore Q. Now, think about Joe not being a male, right? If Joe is not a male, does it follow that he's not a biological father? Yes, right? And this would be modus tollens, right? If F, then M. If biological father, then male. Not male, then not biological father. If P, then Q. Not Q, therefore not P. Also consider this following premise. If Joe is a biological father, then he's a male. Now, if you know that Joe is a male, can you conclude that he must be a biological father, that he has a baby? No. If you did that, you'd be affirming the consequent, right? If biological father, then male, male, therefore biological father. If P, then Q, Q, therefore P. And also consider a case where Joe is not a biological father. Does it follow that he's not a male? No. If a biological father, then male, he's not a father, so he's biological father, so he's not a male? No, and that's denying the antecedent. If P, then Q, not P, therefore not Q. Again, it's important to realize that the reason that these argument forms are invalid is that their logical structures do not guarantee the truth of their conclusions. Hence, these argument forms are always invalid, again, as you'll learn to prove shortly, in a few weeks. Because affirming the consequent and denying the antecedent are fallacies that arise simply in virtue of argument form, they're called formal fallacies. Now, we're primarily interested in discovering the patterns of reasoning, the patterns of thinking in reaching the goal of logic, to distinguish between good and bad arguments. A good argument is one that's valid. It has a pattern such that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. And an invalid argument, a bad argument, is one in which it's possible to have all true premises and a false conclusion. So it's important to pay attention to the patterns and make sure we're identifying them correctly. That's logic. And logic is inescapable. Logic reveals to us necessities that we must acknowledge. And thank you for your kind attention.